What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and tomorrow's What If episode, at least at the time that I'm recording this, basically focuses on Black Panther if he became Star-Lord. And so I thought it'd be kind of cool to do a video on the new powers that T'Challa has. Now, more recently, this has changed as T'Challa's gone back to being Black Panther, and ironically enough, we never covered this story. At least if we did, I can't find it on the channel anywhere, so I don't imagine that we've covered it. But this is basically where Black Panther becomes the King of the Dead. Now, I thought about titling it that, but for obvious reasons, it seems kind of inappropriate after Chadwick Boseman's passing to call it Black Panther becomes the King of the Dead. Just seems a little tasteless, but nonetheless, this is a really important story, and it's actually one that a lot of people are curious about. And technically, it comes off the heels of, and kind of an interim comic, but it comes off the heels of Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four run. Black Panther himself doesn't really have any direct involvement in the Fantastic Four run of Jonathan Hickman. I mean, he appears a little bit. It's really one of these stories where it kind of segues into Avengers and New Avengers by Jonathan Hickman, as well as Avengers versus X-Men, but specifically it comes out of the story of Doom War. Now, Doom War was a really cool story that I know we covered, and it's basically where Dr. Doom orchestrates a coup d'etat in Wakanda, which basically sees Black Panther and his sister Shuri, as well as T'Challa's wife Storm, basically ousted as the leaders of Wakanda, and this kind of hyper-nationalist movement takes over. But the whole thing was designed to be a ruse, so Dr. Doom could sneak into Wakanda, steal all the vibranium, which amplifies magical energy, and then make himself God, which successfully he did, right? He managed to actually do that. And then at the end of the story, Black Panther basically had to eliminate or render all the vibranium across the world completely inert. And so vibranium on Earth just basically became useless chunks of rock. And so that's really where all this picks up. But because of the fact that T'Challa had been injured, he passed the mantle onto his sister Shuri, who became the new Black Panther. So that's kind of how you segue into this. But ultimately, the Fantastic Four are brought into Wakanda by T'Challa himself, right? They're invited here. And there's a couple reasons for this, one of which we'll find out later on over the course of the story. But the second one is because they're long-standing friends, right? Technically, in terms of publication history, Black Panther originally appeared in the Fantastic Four stories, but the Fantastic Four were the first real group that T'Challa actually invited into Wakanda, which was unheard of. And in fact, Reed didn't really know anything about Wakanda when he was invited there. When he showed up, the technological advancement of Wakanda was mind-boggling, right? They had achieved incredible things with regards to all the stuff they'd done. I mean, you guys saw that in the Black Panther movie, that there are some pretty seedy things going on under Wakanda itself, right? And we'll kind of get to those as we cross through it. In terms of the encounter and the reason why Reed is here, the question that Black Panther asks as Reed starts talking about everything in the aftermath of Doom War, the vibranium being rendered inert, that he and the Future Foundation, which is really more of a think tank that's composed of younger kids, a little bit of an aside here, that's one of the things that you'll probably see in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. If ever there's an indication that the Fantastic Four are officially coming into the MCU, what you'll likely see is that Peter Parker has been invited to join the Future Foundation, which is basically an organization created by Reed Richards to focus on like future projects, different things like that, right? It's a big think tank. But the whole discussion here is that the Future Foundation has been working on ways by which Wakanda can kind of reestablish itself as a global power, right? Because without vibranium, essentially they seem to be worthless, right? They have no real money, they have nothing to really barter for. I mean, to give you guys perspective here, vibranium was worth so much money. A gram of vibranium would sell for $10,000. That's an insane amount of money. And when you're sitting on a mountain of vibranium, the amount of money you'd have would be countless, right? I mean, it'd be in the trillions of dollars. But what actually ended up happening here, and this is kind of a funny thing, it's really of a testament to the forward thinking of Black Panther, is that in the idea that ultimately the vibranium they had would either be taken from them or they would kind of run through it or whatever the case was, that the idea was to basically diversify. And so what T'Challa had been doing was actually going through and liquidating a lot of the vibranium and then selling it off for huge amounts of money, which they basically invested in and diversified. The other thing that they had done is they had bought up the national debt or huge chunks of the US government's national debt. So in effect, the US government would be paying Wakanda for seemingly forever, right? Because, it's just national debt. But basically the overall gist of this is that Wakanda's not going broke anytime soon, right? Wakanda, their value stands in the trillions of dollars. And so while they're not necessarily worth as much as they were before, they have more cash on hand than they did before. And so it's still beneficial to them in a variety of ways. Now, what's also kind of going on behind the scenes here is that at some point in the distant past, and this is kind of interesting, the panther god Bast had dealings with the Egyptians. Now, technically, the panther god Bast is actually an Egyptian god, which is something that a lot of people don't know. But Bast, following the, I guess, formation of Wakanda, had gained the attention of the Wakandans themselves. But the biggest question that was always asked is how? How did Bast go from being an Egyptian god to becoming the goddess of the Wakandans? And the reason why was because during a point in the history of Earth, especially when it came to the Egyptian gods themselves, in Marvel Comics, gods do wage war against one another. Specifically, Anubis had killed Amun-Ra and then taken the heart of Amun-Ra and then intended to use this in order to bring a kind of endless night to basically control all those who were dead. Bast had essentially intervened and taken the heart of Amun-Ra for herself, and then in turn buried it in Wakanda, as far away, or a pretty good amount away from Egypt. Now, the big question kind of I have to ask here is, why not just bury it in the New World or someplace like that? We don't really get an answer to that. Instead, it was just in the very early days of Wakanda. This is the reason why, or at least one of the reasons why, the Black Panthers were created, is because over time, the Black Panthers themselves served as much protectors of the Great Mound of Vibranium and building a kingdom around it in order to kind of, expand their wealth, as they were keeping anybody from getting the heart of Amun-Ra and then handing, or at least Anubis himself grabbing it and then kind of taking over as an endless night. And so as a result, what you basically have going on in kind of the background here is Anubis basically returning, resurrecting forces, constantly trying to take this heart from Wakanda, and then that's basically it. It's not the most important thing, but it is a bit of an important thing because, of course, at the moment, Shuri is the current Black Panther, and in the middle of dinner with the Fantastic Four, the Wakandans, and all that kind of stuff, that you have the forces of Amun-Ra that basically launch an invasion and try to break in and try to steal the heart by taking out the Black Panther and basically the earthly avatar of Bast, and so on and so forth. Now, the reason why that kind of matters here is that while these forces are defeated, that T'Challa takes Reed Richards and they basically leave together, but they're going on a kind of journey of sorts to a really cool destination. And of course, Reed is basically wished farewell by the Dora Milaje as well as Susan Storm, but there's a big concern that Reed may not be the person that T'Challa needs in the face of what they're going to basically end up coming across. And so for the first time in the history of Marvel Comics, you're introduced to this amazing concept. And one of the big questions that was asked up until this point is that if T'Challa is the current Black Panther following his father T'Chaka, and then the various Black Panthers that came before him, where do they go when they die? And so ultimately, this basically reveals to us a place called the Necropolis. And the Necropolis is very much a holy city among Wakandans, right? It's a place where only really Black Panthers can go. No one else is really allowed there. It's a very ceremonial and a very holy place. More so than that, it's been around for an exceedingly long time. And so as Reed Richards and T'Challa enter into this place, what you also have is kind of like this gorgeous display of all these old hieroglyphics and all these old signs that predate most of the early empires on Earth. Now, this is a bit of a timeline and continuity issue when it comes to Marvel, because Wakanda as it currently exists has only been around for about 10,000 years, right? In the sense that the first Wakandan became the first Black Panther and so on and so forth. What this seems to be the case of is that largely it was most likely a scenario where people in this part of the world, where they would bury their dead, right? That's kind of how we use that line as a kind of standard between primitive and really disorganized societies versus organized societies, right? The burying of their dead, that life essentially matters. It may have been one of these things that as time progressed, the necropolis was transformed from this place where just the dead were buried to a holy city where those individuals who served as Black Panther would go on to be buried, and as much of a tribute to Bast as it is anything else. And so you kind of have two things that go on at the same time. The first is that the kind of spiritual journey that's undertaken by Black Panther and Reed is also not really met, but you also have a spiritual journey of sorts that's being taken by Shuri, Susan Storm, and Storm herself. Because the idea is that they're actually going to go into the afterlife and they're basically going to face off against Anubis and then essentially defeat him, right? They're going to, basically destroy Anubis, and honestly, that's really all that happens there. For Black Panther himself, as far as the new powers go, he and Reed basically enter into a kind of temple in the necropolis itself to be met by the arrival of the Panther god Bast. Now, one of the things to know, Bast does not just stay here all the time, right? That Bast kind of comes and goes as he or she is needed. When it comes to these different gods in Marvel Comics, with somebody like Bast was technically a male god in the Egyptians and then a female god as far as the Wakandans go, but it's used interchangeably, right? Bast doesn't really have a particular form. It's not really a guy or a girl. It just kind of shifts based on the circumstance, and that's why you hear scenarios, even among the Wakandans themselves, where they'll refer to Bast as both a god and a goddess, because when you're on that level, I guess it doesn't really matter what you ascribe to. But the important thing is is that you end up having basically Bast kind of bringing Reed Richards towards her and then saying, what's your role here? And ultimately, because of the fact that Reed and T'Challa have really been teammates and fought together for so long, that they really kind of see each other as brothers, right? Now, a lot of that is a respect that came by way of just surviving conflicts together, fighting together, but also their intelligence, right? One thing to know is that when it comes to intelligent characters in Marvel Comics, it's not really a direct hierarchy. It kind of is, but it kind of isn't. That if you look at somebody like Tony Stark's very smart, but Tony Stark's a futurist. And that's why a lot of the technology he builds is ahead of what a lot of other people have done. But Reed Richards could build an Iron Man suit. That's not outside his realm of possibility. The biggest problem with Reed Richards is he's always trying to solve the problem of everything. That was one of the things that was kind of laid out during Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four. But then you have somebody like Black Panther, who's highly intelligent, but not necessarily on the same level as Reed. So it's just one of these weird little wonky things. So you can make a hierarchy if you want to, and I'm sure they exist out there. But as far as this element goes between T'Challa and Reed, their intelligence, because of the fact that they fought wars alongside each other against various threats, there's a lot of respect there, right? That and the fact that Reed always honored what it was that T'Challa was trying to do at almost any point in time, and pretty much always sided with him. And that's what he says here, right? I am a loyal second. I'm here out of loyalty because T'Challa trusts me and we trust each other like brothers. And so when he's brought before Bast, he basically kind of stands there to observe everything. And the question that's asked by Bast among Black Panther is, why are you here? Tell me what's in your heart. Now, this is important. This is not a question. It's really almost kind of a challenge of sorts, right? It's not as though Bast does not know what Black Panther wants. If Black Panther lies, there'll be hell to pay. And so it's basically one of these things where it's like, tell me what's in your heart. Tell me what you really want. I.e., if you give me any answer other than what I already know, I'll probably kill you. And so the response of T'Challa is, I want to be what I was before. I want to be a king, right? I want to be the Black Panther. And the question that Bast asks is, then what do I do with your sister? Because your sister is currently the Black Panther. You passed that mantle on to her when you sustained an injury during Doom War, and that if I make you the Black Panther, that takes that power away from her. And right now, she's in the afterlife fighting Anubis. If I remove her from being the Black Panther, she will die. You will basically cost your sister her life. Not only that, it'll be an ultimate betrayal among your own people because they will see the mantle had passed on and then you took it back. And it doesn't work that way. When the mantle is passed on willingly to the next person, it stays with that person until such a time as that person dies and you retake the mantle for yourself, or if that person loses any kind of worth as a Black Panther, they betray Wakanda or something like that, but their actions are deemed so dishonorable, they're not worthy of being Black Panther anymore, and then the mantle would pass back to you again. And so ultimately the response of T'Challa is like, I love my sister and I love the people who are with her. I can't possibly be asked to make such a choice. You cannot ask this of me. And the response of Bast is, I can and I will, right? Bast says, it's your desires that are being judged here. I chose you in the womb, most favored son. You are mine as much as any other. So if it is in your heart's desire to be the champion of your people, I will make you the Panther again. You want to rule? Then sit on the golden throne. Be a boy king. I give it to you. But I have greater needs if you are still fit and still a man to be feared. And that takes T'Challa by surprise, because usually Bast doesn't come along and say, I have need of you, right? It's usually he's the Black Panther, there's a Black Panther that comes after him, and they fight in the glory or in the service of Bast, right? At the pleasure of Bast, in order to keep Wakanda safe from whatever threats may come. And ultimately, the response of Bast is, see it with your own eyes, right? And basically shows T'Challa what it is, the kind of future that's coming. And this leads into a bunch of different things, right? Avengers versus X-Men when the Phoenix Force returns and then all hell breaks loose among the superhero community. The fact that the Necropolis and Wakanda are going to be flooded by Namor the Submariner, which basically brings in the giant blood feud between Namor the Submariner and the Atlanteans and Black Panther and the Wakandans, right? For those of you guys who are always curious why it is that Namor the Submariner and Black Panther hate each other so much, it's because Namor the Submariner flooded Wakanda, killed a ton of people, and that Black Panther responded by killing a ton of Atlanteans, right? So they were basically at war with each other even through Jonathan Hickman's Avengers: The New Avengers run. But given the fact that the multiverse was collapsing, it was pretty much a ceasefire. But what she says is like, this is what awaits, right? The Phoenix Force is returning, all hell's gonna break loose in Wakanda, and the Golden City will fall, and that pales in comparison to what follows, right? Basically, the incursions is what Bast is referencing, the collapse of the multiverse. And so she says, you asked, what greater need is there than service? The answer to that is salvation. So I ask you again, T'Challa, what do you desire? To sit on the throne or to save your people? I.e., your sister Shuri is not going to be the person who's going to save your people. And so, of course, when T'Challa says, I will be whatever it is that you need me to be, then this just solidifies things, right? So, of course, Bast shows up, kills Anubis. That's basically it, right? Kind of manifests a version of herself out there that takes out Anubis, right? Because Anubis is always trying to rise to power, whatever. Anyway, the end result is that Bast is in Necropolis, the Wakandan city of the dead, where all Black Panthers go to die. This is where you will rule as the king of the dead. Now, this was hugely important because if you guys saw the Black Panther film a few years ago, one of the things that you saw, of course, was that T'Challa could communicate with former Black Panthers. That was not originally a power he had. That was not something that he was always able to do as Black Panther. That's something that came out of this. This is something that's brand new. The fact that he can communicate with previous Black Panthers, he has their wisdom, their knowledge, the battles that they faced off against, right? They can all impart that directly to him, and he can in turn use that for his own ends. But he also sits at the judgment of these other Black Panthers. While they can't necessarily stand in and strip him of his mantle, they can basically say, you've betrayed everything that we stand for. And while that may not seem important to a person like T'Challa, who sees himself as an honorable man and whose role as a Black Panther is really designed to ensure that he maintains the honor of not just Wakanda, but all the Black Panthers that came before him. But ultimately, because of what's going on here, that T'Challa is quote unquote returned to the role of Black Panther, but not really, right? The role of Black Panther among the Wakandan people, right? Their leader, their king, that still resides with Shuri. The important thing about this though is that when it all hits the fan, that it's all going to come down to T'Challa. That he is a Black Panther is like almost kind of a personal Black Panther for Bast, but more so than that, he's the king of the dead. That's how it is he's able to control Marvel Zombies during the events of the Secret Wars event in 2015. But I thought this would be a cool story to cover, and I thought it'd be interesting, right? How it is that T'Challa gained his new powers and basically became king of the dead in Marvel Comics. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.